There was never a moment where she said, I don't want to go there. She was really game for exploring some deep and personal aspects of her life. And I mean, I remember, some of the stuff in the film, I'm like, is this too intimate? Is this too intense? There's a section about her eating disorder, for example, but she was always like, no, like, I want to, I'm game, this is important, other people will see themselves in this, and I think that's really true. So I really had a lot of freedom as a director, and that was something we established right at the beginning. She said, I want you to do something raw and genuine and real. I want you to have your space as a storyteller to find the story. And that felt like a real gift for me. She wanted it to be a real film, and part of that is giving a director the freedom to bring their perspective to the project and to the story.
Miss Americana, such a hit already. Day one, it premiered here at Sundance. You've never made a documentary quite like this before. How did you first get involved with Taylor Swift and come up with this idea?
Well, Taylor and I were introduced by Netflix and by the producer Morgan Neville. And we met in person, immediately hit it off, had an easy rapport, I think both as creative people and storytellers, but also as women who have had careers in male-dominated industries. We had a surprising amount of stuff to connect on. And when I met Taylor, she was going through a transformational period in her life. She had just come out of being away from the public eye for a year. She was coming back, but trying to live in a new way, so that instead of living for the approval of other people, she was trying to live for her own approval and by her own values. So I was really fortunate in that I got to watch her go through this period of real change in her life, and that's what the film's about.
That's so interesting, that you were able to capture that particular moment because, when you're a public figure, but certainly when you're a global superstar like Taylor Swift, you've got to negotiate so much with your image. There's a certain expectation from the public. There's all the people around you and marketing on your team, who are pushing you in a certain direction. And then you also just want to express yourself. And, how did you see all that negotiation going on? And what were some ways that you captured that or made that visually compelling in your film?
Yeah. Well, I'd say that definitely, she's a performing artist. So she's someone who goes out on stage and people clap for her. That's been a big part of who she was since she was 12 years old, writing her first songs. So for someone like that, who's now on this massive international stage, the pressure of what people think of you is even bigger. And she's someone who is under this extraordinary amount of public scrutiny, and it's not just feedback on her music, it's feedback on her as a person. So we captured that in interviews. She hadn't done an interview for 3 years before talking to me. We captured that in filming verite style, fly on the wall in her life, whether on stage in front of 80,000 people or alone in her car or in a hotel room. So we got a whole range and spectrum of her life, and I hope that people see through this film that just because she's a celebrity doesn't mean she doesn't experience the same pains and challenges that other people do too.
What do you think is the biggest misconception of her?
I think the biggest misconception is that there's a giant pop machine behind her, or like a big factory or a massive team of people. And what I was so struck by was that she is the sole creative force behind everything in a way that I found incredibly inspiring. She's written all her own songs for 15 years, but she also comes up with ideas for the album cover. In the film, you see her coming up with the idea for this massive music video. And I think it's so cool to be able to see a female artist have a vision and then see that vision realized on the highest level possible. And there are a few moments in the film where we do that.
That's so interesting. What was the biggest challenge throughout this whole process? First off, how long were you shooting and gathering material, and what was the hardest thing about making this ultimately?
I think the hardest thing is, as with many documentaries, it's building trust. So that just took time. And over the course of the film, what was interesting to see was that not only was Taylor approaching her artwork and public approval in a different way, but she started to have this feminist political awakening in a really interesting way that culminated with her deciding to make a political endorsement for the first time. So getting to be in those very emotional, intense situations in the scenes that led her to that decision just took, her getting used to me as a presence in the room. And when I film, I try to be very still to kind of radiate compassion and support, to be a non-presence, but to also feel like a positive energy in the room.
What was it that you think led to that political awakening?
Well, there's a few things. I mean, before that, there was a leash on Taylor, I would say, and she felt a leash on her. And one of the reasons for that was that she felt the pressure of being a good girl, as she describes it in the film, the pressure to not offend anyone, not make people uncomfortable with your points of view. And another element was that when she became a singer-songwriter, she saw what happened to the Dixie Chicks in 2006, which is that the lead singer made a political remark that effectively demolished their career. So she saw that. A year before I started filming, she had gone through a sexual assault trial that was a very difficult experience for her, but also opened her eyes to so many things. And so I think all of that stuff together, plus her deciding to care less about the impossible expectations and approval of the world, all of that led to her being at this place of strength where she could say, I need to be true to myself. I'm going to risk whatever it is. I need to be able to say this and be on the right side of history.
Was this a case where you think you found the story in the editing? And if so, like, how much footage did you shoot and have to whittle this down to? Or was it something where you knew along the way, okay, I've got this narrative, I've got this through line?
I think I knew while filming what the spine of the narrative was, and I was excited about it because I thought it was a story no one had heard before and that a lot of people would relate to, not just because of the politics, but because it is this coming-of-age experience. There's the climactic scene of the film is a scene where Taylor decides to not do what her family, who loves her, wants her to do. She decides to go in a different direction, and I think that's something everyone has that moment in their life and can relate to. So that story came through in filming, but what the big challenge in editing was how much backstory, how much of Taylor's previous 15-year-long career to incorporate and how. And we ultimately decided to just use the backstory sparingly at a few moments just to give the context that you need to understand where she is emotionally now. But we could also do really fun things, like one of my favorite sequences in the film came from in the edit room. The editors and I realized that at every concert she's ever done, she often has a thing where she's wearing one costume and then she rips it off to reveal another costume. And so we put those all together into this like super cut. And then one of our editors, Lindsay Utes, had the idea to pair this montage of her ripping off costumes with her interview talking about how female artists are under this constant pressure to reinvent themselves. You can't be the same thing for too long or people get bored of you. And that became this really profound central moment in the film that we found in the edit room.
What do you think the future holds for Taylor? You mentioned how female artists are so often pressured to just constantly reinvent themselves. Does she still feel that pressure? Or if not, what do you think is next?
Yeah. Well, there's a moment in the film where she talks about how for pop artists, it's almost like there's an elephant graveyard that women get thrown into at age 35. So yeah, on the one hand, there certainly is a ticking clock and a pressure on the career of female pop artists. On the other hand, Taylor is peerless in a lot of ways. She's already done things that no one has done before. I can't think of any other confessional singer-songwriter who's had a 15-year career selling out stadiums through that whole time. I think her relationship with her fans is unique, and she's been pushing herself and growing as an artist in so many ways that, she totally could do things that no one has done before, and I'm really excited to see. I would love to go to like a Taylor Swift stadium show when she's 80 years old. I think that would be amazing to see what stuff she's writing songs about, what her perspective is then.